Welcome to Authoritarianism 101. My name is Aengus, and I'd like to speak with you for a few moments about why it's important to study authoritarian political ideologies. Before I begin, though, I should define what is meant by the term authoritarian ideologies in the first place. Authoritarian ideologies are the doctrines and dogmas that provide the intellectual supports for authoritarian states, such as fascist, communist, or theocratic states. Theocratic states, or theocracies, by the way, are states which use theologies, or religions, to provide intellectual support for authoritarian political rule. The fundamental reason that one should study authoritarian ideologies is to reduce one's own and one's society's vulnerability to these ideas. For by understanding authoritarian ideas thoroughly, we make ourselves aware of the logical flaws in these doctrines' arguments. This awareness permits us to fight off the hold these arguments might otherwise have on our own minds, and makes it possible for us to break the grip they have on the minds of others. But there is another, and perhaps even more profound reason to study authoritarian ideas. And that is simply to be able to recognize these ideas in the first place. For you see, most authoritarian ideas aren't actually comprised of the explicitly political dogmas that are readily identifiable as, say, fascism or communism. But rather, they are the metaphysical, epistemological, and ethical ideas that provide the premises and logical defenses for these doctrines. These deeper aspects of the authoritarian tradition of intellectual manipulation are dangerous because they can lead us toward authoritarian conclusions about politics if we don't recognize them as possessing the power to do so. So learning to recognize them is crucial to defending ourselves against being manipulated. Consider, for instance, how the metaphysical doctrine known as idealism prepares us to come to authoritarian conclusions about politics. I'll use the doctrine of idealism as an example because of all of the metaphysical dogmas utilized as premises for authoritarian arguments, idealism has been and remains by far the most commonly employed and historically the most effective. Before I begin this exposition of idealism's political utility, however, I'll ask you to note that while idealism is the metaphysical doctrine which has most frequently been used as a premise for authoritarian political arguments, not every philosopher or theologian who is identifiable as a metaphysical idealist is also identifiable as a political authoritarian. Metaphysical idealism says that reality is created by, or is somehow the product of, a mind or minds, rather than the product of physical or material forces. It further says that reality is in some sense mental or spiritual in nature, rather than physical or material. On first consideration, this doctrine may seem merely innocuously mystical, and even vaguely attractive, and certainly not insidious. But consider one of its logical implications. If reality is created by a mind, then that mind could conceivably claim ownership of reality, and claim ownership of everything in it, on the grounds that the creator of something has a right to possess and control the things that it creates. When one gives consideration to this implication of idealism, the insidious ramifications of this doctrine begin to become more apparent. For the owner of everything in reality could plausibly claim a right to seize all of the property that other people claim as their own. They could claim a right to control all of the natural resources that people depend upon for their livelihoods, and even claim a right to control people themselves, on the grounds that people are aspects of the reality that this supposed mind creates. Now, all of these speculations may seem fancifully abstract, until we consider that they are in fact aspects and implications of that most historically common manifestation of metaphysical idealism, which is known as theism. For all of the major theologies or religions assert that a great mind or spirit denoted God owns everything because he creates everything, and therefore has a right to rule human beings and their property, and to choose certain human beings to rule other human beings in his stead. This doctrine establishes the primary basis of that form of political authoritarianism that is called theocracy, which God's prophets here on earth, the same prophets who concoct these theologies in the first place, assert gives them the right to rule the world as God's earthly representatives. And now we begin to see why it's important to study and have a firm grasp of the abstract logic of the authoritarian tradition of intellectual manipulation. For if you did not know that idealism, theism, and that ancillary application of these doctrines, known as creationism, could lead you to authoritarian conclusions about politics, you might ignore these doctrines even as they became more influential in your culture, or you might even embrace them yourself, believing them harmless. I must caution you, however, that the authoritarian tradition of ideological manipulation only begins with the doctrines known as idealism and theism. There is, in fact, a vast and darkling labyrinth of authoritarian dogmas that lead off in all kinds of logical directions, and that touch upon every aspect of human life. Any of these doctrines can lead you astray personally, and lead your society astray politically, and so they must all be understood in order to be defended against. As they are recorded and posted, these video presentations will elucidate each of these dogmas. But if you can't wait to learn more, you can reference a textual study I've prepared about this subject entitled Flowers from the Garden of Evil, Everyone's Guide to the Elements of Authoritarian Dogma. Through Amazon Books, this survey is available in an inexpensive ebook edition that costs no more than a cup of coffee with a tip at Starbucks. And a paperback edition with an extensive index is also available from that source. So congratulations on initiating your study of a tradition of intellectual manipulation that has ensnared the minds of billions of people through the millennia, and which still ensnares the preponderance of the human race. By familiarizing yourself with this tradition, you will learn how to stay clear of these snares, and so be able to fly free intellectually into the sunlight of the opposite tradition of political thought, the one which supports rather than subverts a benevolent and progressive society.